I used to think that love was something you proved with big, bold gestures, the kind that made people gasp or cry or remember forever. That's why, when I found out my younger sister Camille was having her engagement party at a grand estate 12 hours away, I didn't hesitate. I packed my car with a handmade cake, enough layers to make a pastry chef sweat, and started driving before the sun had even risen over my quiet little apartment in Missouri. It was December, and the weather had already turned cruel. A snowstorm had been threatening the entire Midwest for days, inching its way east like it had a grudge to settle. But when I looked at the storm tracker that morning, my fingers already wrapped around my keys, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt purpose. I told myself, this is what showing up looks like. Camille and I weren't close the way sisters are supposed to be. Not anymore, at least. We'd shared bunk beds, birthday cakes, and whispered secrets for most of our childhood. But somewhere between college and careers, between who she became and who I stayed, the space between us grew too wide to cross with small talk. I figured this was my chance to bridge that gap, to show her I still remembered, that I still cared. The cake was my olive branch. 3 layers of lemon sponge, raspberry compote, buttercream frosting, and sugared violets resting like frozen wishes on top. I'd ordered it from the boutique bakery where she and I used to split macarons as teenagers, the one she said made desserts. So pretty, they make you believe in magic. It cost more than I should have spent, and it rode the entire way beside, me like a passenger. I buckled it in with care. The drive was brutal. Highway signs disappeared behind waves of sleet. Semi-trucks barreled past me like they couldn't feel the ice that gripped the road. I stopped once, at a truck stop outside Indianapolis, just long enough to refuel and change into the dress I'd packed in the trunk. I stood in the bathroom under fluorescent lights, shivering as I pulled nylons over frozen legs, telling myself, again and again, she's worth it. This will matter. But the truth is, somewhere deep down, I was hoping it would be more than just a surprise. I wanted it to be a reminder that no matter how far apart we'd drifted, no matter how differently we lived, I was still her sister, still family. I thought maybe, just maybe, seeing me show up like this, cake in hand, cheeks pink from the cold, heart open, might make something click, might bring us back. By the time I reached the estate, the sky had gone from white to a dusky shade of winter gray. The place was stunning, something out of a bridal catalog. Wrought iron gates twinkled with fairy lights. Snow dusted the trees in perfect little puffs. You could smell the money in the air, mixed with the sharp scent of pine and something floral, roses maybe. The kind of place where people whisper their laughter and pose like they're in a lifestyle ad. A valet in a long wool coat jogged up as I parked. His breath fogged in the air as he looked into my car and said, "Delivery?" "No," I replied, smiling despite the ache in my bones. "I'm family." He blinked at me, uncertain. It was a small moment, but it was the first. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. Music from a live quartet floated through the hall. Champagne shimmered in crystal flutes. The walls were gold-trimmed, and everywhere I looked were faces I'd grown up with. Family. Friends, cousins, aunts, and uncles. The ones who used to hold my hand at Thanksgiving or help me practice piano in the den. But now, they looked past me. No one ran to hug me. No one smiled wide and said my name with delight. I stood there, cake box in hand, like someone who'd wandered in from the wrong side of the glass. Then I saw her. Camille stood at the far end of the room, draped in silver silk, her hair curled just so. She looked like the kind of bride people envy. Elegant. Untouchable. She was laughing at something someone whispered, the kind of laugh you save for people you trust. But the second her eyes found mine, everything changed. Her smile faltered, her shoulders tensed. She stared for a beat too long before walking over, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "You actually came?" she said, blinking as if I were a mirage. "I drove all day," I replied, holding the cake up slightly like a peace offering. "Surprise." She looked at the box like it might bite her. "I didn't think you'd make it in this weather," she muttered. And then, she didn't say anything else. She didn't hug me, didn't introduce me to her friends, didn't offer to take the cake. Instead, she turned to one of her bridesmaids and whispered something that made them both glance at me and laugh quietly. That's when I felt it. The cold I'd driven through wasn't behind me anymore. It was here, inside, stretching out like a second storm no one else could see. And still, I stayed, because love, even when it feels one-sided, doesn't just leave easily. It sits, it waits, it hopes. But that night, I would learn something I hadn't wanted to believe. I would learn what it feels like to show up with your whole heart and be met with a door that was never meant to open. If you've ever been the one who showed up when no one expected or wanted you to, then you know. You don't forget that. Silence. You don't forget that kind of cold, and you don't come out of it the same. If you've ever felt unseen by the people who were supposed to love you most, subscribe for more. Because you're not alone, and your story deserves to be told. I didn't expect a red carpet or a standing ovation, but I guess I also didn't expect to be treated like a mistake someone forgot to erase. I stood near the entryway for several minutes, unsure where to go or what to do. The cake in my arms was growing heavier by the second, though I think it wasn't the weight of the cake I was feeling. It was the silence, the awkward, unsaid things hanging in the air like smoke. Camille had vanished into the crowd after her lukewarm greeting, and I was left standing there with my carefully selected dress, my wind-chapped face, and a sense of disorientation I couldn't shake. I tried to find my mother. I thought maybe she'd make it better. Maybe she'd pull me into a hug, brush the hair from my face, and say, "You made it. I'm so glad you're here." Instead, when I found her standing by the fireplace, sipping wine from a delicate glass, she offered only a glance and a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Odette," she said, using my full name like she was introducing a distant cousin. "Try not to make this about you, okay? Tonight is for Camille." It was like being doused with ice water, only I was already frozen through. I forced a polite nod. "Of course," I replied, because what else can you say when the one person who's supposed to make you feel safe confirms your worst fear, that you don't belong, not even here, not even tonight? I set the cake down gently on the side table, next to rows of pastel macarons and hand-piped eclairs, every one of them a little prettier than the last. No one noticed. No one asked. I faded into the background like a watermark, barely visible unless you looked hard enough. The party had a rhythm to it. Laughter in curated bursts, champagne glasses clinking in harmony, bridesmaids gliding from room to room like they were floating. And somewhere amid the string quartet's version of At Last, I began to understand this wasn't just a party. It was a portrait, a performance. And I had walked onto the stage without a role. At first, I tried to shrug it off. I found a quiet spot near the dessert table and sipped water from a plastic cup, hoping to blend in. But blending in only works when you haven't already been marked as the outlier. People glanced at me the way you glance at an accident on the side of the road, not with concern, but curiosity. As if I had wandered in from another story, and they were trying to piece together how I ended up in theirs. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable rustle of silk and the sound of whispered voices. She wasn't on the list, was she? Someone asked. "No way," another replied, laughter trailing behind the words like perfume. "This has to be one of her stunts." And there it was, the twist of the knife. I knew that tone. I'd heard it before. In the hallway after high school award ceremonies, at family dinners where my successes were shrugged off, and Camille's smallest triumphs celebrated like royal coronations. The implication was always the same. I was too much, too loud, too emotional, too desperate to be included. But that night, I didn't speak. I didn't correct the narrative. I didn't tell them about the 12-hour drive through a snowstorm or the bakery that opened early just for me. I didn't tell them about how I'd rehearsed how I'd say, "surprise," or how I'd planned to take a photo with Camille, holding the cake, one for the memory book. I swallowed all of it, every word, every ache. I wandered through the house like a ghost, brushing past framed engagement photos where my absence was glaring. Not one image showed me, not even in the background. I paused in the hallway, staring at the carefully curated life Camille had built, one that no longer had room for me. When I stumbled upon the coat room, I thought I might find a moment to gather myself, to reset. Instead, I found an ornate tray, labeled bridal party gifts. 10 boxes, each glittering with ribbons and tiny handwritten cards. My name wasn't on any of them. That's when my phone buzzed, a notification from a group text, Camille's bridal team. My stomach dropped. I wasn't supposed to be in it. Maybe someone had added me by mistake. Or maybe the universe was tired of watching me bend backward for a family that never planned to catch me. One message caught my eye. It was sent that morning by Camille. "She doesn't fit the look. We'll say the list was full." I read it 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, just the kind of clarity that punches the breath out of your chest. The cake, the drive, the effort, it hadn't been overlooked. It had been unwanted. I left the coat room and stepped outside for air. The cold slapped my face, but I welcomed it. At least it was honest. I stood there, staring at the snow-covered driveway where my car had parked just an hour before, wondering how something as soft as snow could feel so unforgiving. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stood still, letting the winter wind scrape away whatever warmth I had left. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to face. That it wasn't just that I didn't belong in that room. It was that they'd worked to make sure I knew it. Sometimes people don't push you away all at once. Sometimes they chip at you, slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left of you in their picture. And when you finally notice, when you finally say, "Hey, I'm still here," they look at you like you're the problem. But I wasn't the problem. I was just finally waking up. If you've ever stood on the edge of a room full of people who are supposed to love you and felt more alone than you ever have in your life, know this: you are not broken. You are not too much. You are not invisible. You are just in the wrong room, and it is okay to walk out. I don't remember exactly when the tears started, only that they weren't dramatic, just slow and steady, the kind that come when your heart realizes something long before your mind is willing to admit it. I had found a quiet stall at the far end of the venue's powder room, away from the glittering chandeliers and curated laughter of the engagement party. I sat on the cold tile floor, still clutching my coat like armor, my back pressed to the door as if it could hold back the weight of everything I'd been trying not to feel. The walls were painted soft ivory, probably chosen for how well it photographed. I stared at the ceiling, at the gold-trimmed sconces casting warm, forgiving light. There was nothing warm about how I felt. The words from that group chat were still etched into my thoughts, especially Camille's. "She doesn't fit the look," as though I were an accessory they could afford to leave behind. All those years, I'd made excuses for the subtle snubs, the missed invitations, the way family photos were carefully cropped, how no one ever quite remembered what I did for work. I chalked it up to forgetfulness, to busyness, to them not understanding. But the truth had always been there, like a splinter you tell yourself isn't worth pulling out. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat. There was no sobbing, no scene. Just the quiet unraveling of the hope I had carried with me across state lines and snowstorms. 12 hours on the road, thinking that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. I had risked my safety, my sanity, and now I was sitting on a bathroom floor trying to make sense of the fact that my presence wasn't just unexpected, it was unwelcome. I heard footsteps outside the stall, laughter, a burst of giggles. Then the door shut, and silence returned. It felt like a metaphor for everything that night. Eventually, I stood. Not because I was ready, but because you can only sit on a cold floor for so long before your body reminds you there's still life to live. I washed my face, careful not to smudge the makeup I'd applied with shaking hands that morning in a gas station restroom. The woman looking back at me in the mirror looked tired, yes, but something else too. Like someone who had seen a piece of truth and wasn't going to look away from it anymore. I stepped into the hallway and took a wrong turn. At least, I thought it was a wrong turn until I realized it was exactly where I needed to be. The service. Corridor was narrow, walls lined with racks of glassware and trays waiting to be cleared. The sound of the party was muffled here, but not gone. I walked slowly, hoping to find another exit, or maybe just a place to breathe. That's when I heard her. Camille's voice. Familiar, too familiar, light, tipsy, carefree. She actually came, she said, a laugh in her throat like she was recalling something hilariously inconvenient. 12 hours through a blizzard. For what? A cake? There was another voice, one I didn't recognize at first. Maybe a bridesmaid, maybe someone from the groom's side. It didn't matter. Their laughter echoed off the tile. Honestly, Camille continued, if she'd crashed on the way, it would have saved us all the awkwardness. My breath caught. Not because it was unexpected, but because somewhere deep down, I had feared those exact words. To hear them spoken aloud, casually without hesitation, was like a punch to the chest. I backed away slowly, careful not to make a sound. My throat burned, my hands shaking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to move. I found another restroom, empty this time, and locked myself inside. This time, I cried. Really cried. Not for attention, not out of drama, but because something sacred had been broken. Trust. Belonging. The fragile belief that if you loved someone enough, they would eventually love you back in the way you needed most. I had always shown up for Camille. At school plays when our parents were too busy. During her college move-in when she was too nervous to speak. On her 25th birthday when her friends flaked and I drove 2 hours just to take her out. I had been the shadow that cheered from the wings, the one who remembered the small things, who forgave quickly, who swallowed the hurt and kept smiling. And now I knew. It had never been enough. Not for her. Maybe not for anyone in that house. Eventually, the tears dried. Not because I felt better, but because the sadness had turned into something else. Resolve, maybe. Or grief. The kind that comes when you realize someone you love doesn't see you as family. Doesn't even see you as a person. I left that restroom different than I entered. Not stronger? Not yet. But clearer. The fog of nostalgia, of hope, of what if, gone. Back in the kitchen, the cake still sat on the counter where I'd left it. Pristine. Untouched. The silver box unopened. The gold ribbon still intact. I stared at it for a long time. It was beautiful, delicate, almost too perfect to eat. I had picked it out weeks ago, commissioned it from a bakery that specialized in handcrafted designs. Camille had once said, strawberry and champagne was her favorite. I had remembered. She hadn't. A server appeared, blinking in surprise. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. Guests aren't allowed back here." "I'm just leaving," I replied, and I did, without saying goodbye. Without demanding an apology, without asking for anything else that wouldn't be freely given. Outside, the air was sharp, slicing through the coat like a reminder that the warmth I needed wasn't waiting behind me. I reached my car, sat behind the wheel, and looked at my phone. 14 missed calls, messages, notifications. None of them mattered anymore. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a roadside motel off the highway, paid in cash, didn't leave my name. I left my phone face down on the nightstand, turned on the television, and let the voices on the screen drown out the ones in my head. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. Because somewhere in that 12-hour drive, somewhere between the wind and the ice and the blind belief that love was enough, I forgot that I mattered too. But I remembered. I remembered in the stillness, in the pain, in the silence. And once you remember, you don't forget again. Morning light spilled across the thin motel curtains like an apology. It didn't erase the ache in my chest, but it softened the edges. I woke, still wrapped in yesterday's clothes. My coat draped over the desk chair, still carrying the faint scent of buttercream and road salt. My phone blinked with notifications, its screen flashing with the persistence of people who wanted to be heard, but not understood. I didn't reach for it right away. I sat up slowly, as if my body was trying to remind me that I hadn't broken, only bent further than it should have had to. After a hot shower that did little to rinse away the heaviness, I finally picked up my phone. 14 missed calls, dozens of unread messages. But not one of them asked if I was okay. Not a single, "Are you safe?" or "We were worried." The words waiting for me were variations of one theme: inconvenience, embarrassment, damage control. "You embarrassed Camille. Why would you leave the cake and disappear? You always make things harder than they need to be." One message from my cousin Meg cut deeper than the rest. "You always make everything about you." This was her night. I set the phone down carefully, like it might shatter. But it wasn't the phone that was fragile. It was something inside me. Something I'd been told to keep quiet and contained. For years, to make room for people who never once made space for me. Scrolling further, I saw a message from my mother in the family group chat. A single sentence that undid years of barely held hope. "She's been emotionally unstable lately. Just give her space." That was the story now. Not that I drove 12 hours to show up with a handmade cake. Not that I overheard my sister laughing about how peaceful things would be if I didn't survive the drive. Not that I was the only one who walked into that room alone. No, the new truth was that I had ruined it, that I was dramatic, that I made the party about me. They weren't just pushing me away, they were rewriting me out entirely. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, paralyzed not by weakness, but by the overwhelming understanding that this wasn't just about a single night. This had been happening for years. At my college graduation, no one had flown in. At my first apartment, they sent me a gift card with no note. My promotion last year, one I had worked tirelessly for, was left out of the family newsletter, while Camille's yoga studio photo shoot got 3 paragraphs. I wasn't unseen. I was deliberately invisible. I made myself coffee using the motel's ancient machine, the kind that sputtered more than it brewed. The bitter liquid didn't soothe, but it grounded me. I sat at the small table by the window and looked outside. Snow had started to melt along the roadside, slushy and gray, afar. Cry from the romantic snow globe image I'd envisioned when I left the city. This was the truth. Messy, unfiltered, melting down to what was real. When I finally scrolled through Camille's Instagram, the caption hit me like cold water. A perfect night with all the people I love. The photo showed her glowing, surrounded by her bridesmaids in matching faux fur shawls, champagne in hand. I wasn't in the frame. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't even mentioned. She had erased me in real time. I sat with that for a long while, not moving, not speaking, letting the weight of it settle into something solid. Then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife a little deeper, I received a message from a former coworker. "Hey, weren't you supposed to be at that party? Camille said you couldn't make it. Everything okay?" That was when I realized the rewrite had already begun. The narrative was shifting, spreading. And the more I stayed silent, the more power it would have. I opened a folder on my phone titled Proof. I didn't create it for revenge. I had started it months ago during a different family conflict, one that ended with me apologizing for things I hadn't done. That night, I decided I wouldn't be caught empty-handed again. Inside the folder, a screenshot of the group message where Camille said I didn't fit the look. A photo of the cake in the kitchen, still untouched. A time-stamped image of my dashboard clock when I arrived, 12 hours after I started the drive. A short video clip I'd taken of the cake through the kitchen window after I left, still in its silver box. No one had moved it. I didn't feel anger looking at those things. I felt clarity. Like someone had finally turned the lights on. That evening, I composed a short post on social media. Just 3 photos: the snow-covered roads, the boxed cake, under warm light, and a quiet selfie of me holding the cake outside the venue, wind-blown, red-cheeked, hopeful. My caption was simple. Sometimes you show up for people who wouldn't shovel your name off a sidewalk, but that's how you learn. Some things you do out of love. Some things teach you who deserves it. I turned off comments after 2 hours. Not because I was afraid of what people would say, but because I had already said enough. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed space. Then, I opened my email and attached the receipt for the cake. The subject line read, "Receipt, Camille's engagement." The body of the email contained one line. "Attached is the cake I paid for, the one you left behind. I sent it to my mother, to my aunt who organized the party, and to Camille. Nothing cruel, nothing petty, just truth." The response from my mother came quickly. 4 words. "This isn't helping, Adele. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just another attempt to center the narrative on someone else's comfort." I closed my laptop. And for the first time in years, I didn't care what they thought. Because I was done trying to squeeze myself into spaces that were never meant to hold me. I was tired of being the footnote in my own story, and I was finally ready to write the rest for myself. It was almost noon when I finally opened my curtains. The sky was washed in a dull gray, the kind of overcast that didn't bring storm or sun, just a silent pause. I moved slowly around my small apartment, every motion deliberate. The kettle whistled softly as I poured water over a tea bag, the scent of mint and chamomile curling through the air like memory. It was a ritual I'd picked up after my father passed, a way to anchor my mornings before the noise came. The silence that filled my apartment now wasn't empty. It was earned. After the message from my mother telling me I was not helping, I hadn't replied. There was nothing left to clarify. I didn't need to explain pain to people who insisted it didn't exist unless it inconvenienced them. But clarity has a weight of its own. It settles in the bones, a quiet ache that reminds you what you've carried and for how long. I'd carried loyalty like a torch, believing it would one day warm me in return. But loyalty without reciprocity burns you long before it lights your path. My phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from Camille's fiancé, or maybe former fiancé now. The subject line was blank, the preview just 3 words. I heard everything. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, blinking against the screen, a kind of proof that the silence I left behind had begun to echo. Outside, slush lined the sidewalks, gray and broken where cars had passed. I sat on the edge of my couch and stared out the window, watching the world move on like it always does. And then I did something that surprised even myself. I smiled. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was something quieter, sturdier. The beginning of something unspoken that had waited years to bloom. That night, I baked, not a statement cake, not something grand or Instagram-worthy. Just a simple lemon loaf, the kind my grandmother used to make when I was little, and she'd let me crack the eggs, whispering, "This is how you keep a family together." I used to believe her. I used to think the right meal, the right gesture, the right sacrifice could heal anything. But healing, I was learning, sometimes means letting. As the loaf cooled on the counter, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not for anyone else this time, but for me. I wrote about how small a person can feel when their absence is more convenient than their presence. I wrote about the sound of your sister laughing behind closed doors about your death like it would be a solution. I wrote about the weight of silence when it's used as a weapon, not a balm. I didn't intend to share it. I just needed it out of me. The next morning, I walked 2 blocks to the small bakery I loved, the same one I'd visited the week I ordered Camille's engagement. Cake! The woman behind the counter remembered me. "Oh, did they enjoy the cake?" she asked brightly. I hesitated. "Actually," I said, my voice even, "it never made it to the table." Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. I didn't offer more. "I'd like to order another one," I added. "Something smaller, just for me." This time, I chose a simple vanilla with gold dust on the edges. No fondant message, no ribbons, just peace, wrapped in parchment. Back home, I lit a candle and placed it on the counter beside the cake. No celebration, no crowd, just me. And it was enough. Later that day, I received another message, this time from someone unexpected. Blake, Camille's closest friend, the one I'd overheard in the kitchen with her, the one who had joked about how quiet it would be if I hadn't made it. Her message read, "I'm not proud of who I was that night. I'm sorry. That's all." There was no justification, no excuse about nerves or alcohol, just an admission. And for reasons I couldn't explain, it meant something. Not because I needed her apology, but because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. I wasn't inventing the pain I felt. I sat with her words like I might sit with a fragile cup of tea, warm, cautious. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That evening, I began writing again. Not just a post, not just a vent, but a piece of my story. The truth of what happened, woven not with vengeance, but with clarity. I wrote for the people who had ever driven 12 hours through a snowstorm with love in their hands, only to be turned into a footnote. I wrote for the people who had spent years trying to earn their seat at a table that was never set for them. I didn't post it yet. I just saved it, because I was finally learning that not every truth needs to be shouted. Some truths simply need to be seen. The next morning, the apartment was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel like exile. It felt like a blank canvas. And for the first time in years, I believed I could paint something honest. Opened my inbox again and reread the message from Camille's fiancé. This time I opened it. Inside, he wrote, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. I stayed silent and I regret it. I heard everything. And now I'm hearing more." It was the only message that didn't try to tell me how to feel. I replied, simply, "Thank you for listening." That was enough. No more defending my heart to people who treated it like a hallway rug. No more apologies for taking up space. No more showing up for people who never looked back. I didn't burn bridges that week. I watched them collapse under their own weight. And as I stood on the other side, barefoot, ash-streaked, and whole, I realized something. The peace I had been begging for wasn't waiting on the other side of their approval. It had been waiting for me quietly, in my own hands all along. The sun was hanging low when I arrived at my Aunt Miriam's house that Saturday. It cast a dusty, golden hue through the windows, catching in the lace curtains like old memories. I had been here countless times before. Holiday brunches, family anniversaries, childhood birthdays. But today the air was heavier, laced with the static tension of what was about to unfold. Something was different. The kind of difference that settles into the walls before anyone speaks, like the hush before a thunderstorm. Miriam greeted me at the door with a hug that lingered just a second longer than usual. Her voice was low and steady as if she already knew. "Whatever happens in there," she whispered, "don't let them shrink you." I nodded, silent. My chest ached with the words I hadn't said yet, the truth I'd been carrying around, like a fragile bowl of glass. I walked in and was immediately met with the familiar chaos of a family gathering. Muffled laughter, glasses clinking, someone arguing lightly about syrup flavors. But beneath it all, there was a hum of unease, like everyone was waiting for something they couldn't name. I took a seat near the window. No one greeted me, not with anything real. A few nodded, offered tight smiles, but their eyes skipped over me like I was an afterthought. And there she was, Camille. Standing at the far end of the dining room, radiant in a cream sweater and subtle lipstick, she raised her glass and tapped it with a manicured nail. The room quieted instantly. She smiled, the kind of polished smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "I just want to say," she began, her voice thick with sweetness, "that this week has reminded me of something very important. That love wins when family chooses grace over ego." It was a performance, delivered with the same precision she had always reserved for moments she needed to control the narrative, the kind that demanded applause and compliance in equal measure. Few people clapped. Someone muttered, "So true," and I felt every pair of eyes slide in my direction like slow-moving floodlights. I stood. I hadn't planned to. I hadn't prepared a speech or mapped out my words. But I knew that if I sat through this, if I let that version of the story become the truth, something in me would fracture permanently. "May I say something too?" I asked, my voice soft but unwavering. A hush fell, thicker this time. "Aunt." Miriam's fork stopped midair. Camille's champagne froze inches from her lips. "I drove 12 hours through a snowstorm," I began, steadying my breath, "to surprise my sister with a cake she once told me was her favorite. I walked into that party drenched, exhausted, hopeful. And what met me wasn't warmth or welcome. It was silence, and whispers, and laughter I wasn't meant to hear." Camille shifted in place. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her grip on the glass, tightening. "I didn't get a seat. I wasn't in the slideshow. My name wasn't on a single place card. I overheard my name used like a punchline. Heard my pain weighed as an inconvenience. And when I left, not one person asked if I was okay. There was a sound then. A glass clink, a sharp inhale. Someone in the back muttered, "Jesus." But I kept going, my voice more sure with every word. "Camille, I heard what you said in the kitchen, about how silence would have been better. About how you'd rather have sympathy than my presence." "That was taken out of context," she interjected, her voice thin with panic. "I have the recording," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. "If anyone needs context." The room froze. I tapped the screen and her voice filled the space, echoed too loud now in the stillness. Her laughter, followed by the words, "Imagine if she'd crashed. I could have used the quiet." Then someone else's snort, and Camille's voice again. "Honestly, it would have been a better story." The the clip ended. Silence, heavy and unrelenting, rolled through the room. Camille's fiancé, Daniel, sat at the corner of the table, his jaw slack, his hands in his lap. His eyes were locked on Camille, and in them was something unfamiliar. Not rage, not shock, but realization. I wondered what version of her he was meeting for the first time right now. Camille's voice shook. "You don't get to twist this." I looked her in the eye. "You twisted it when you decided protecting your image mattered more than your sister." Her lips parted to argue, but nothing came out. She stood still, breathing like she had run a mile, mascara trembling under her eyes. For the first time, in a long time, I didn't feel like I was the smaller one between us. I didn't stay for dessert. As I reached for my coat, Aunt Miriam brushed her hand against my back. Her words were a whisper, but they landed like thunder. "You didn't just speak your truth. You took back the story." Outside, the air was cold and clean. The street was quiet, a few leaves skating across the pavement like they were free from everything. I stood there for a moment before getting in my car, letting the wind carry away the weight I'd finally laid down. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt whole. Sometimes speaking up isn't about being right. It's about reminding yourself that you matter, that your pain matters, your story matters, and silence is not always noble. That confrontation doesn't always burn bridges. Sometimes it clears the fog. And when the fog lifts, you finally get to see who's really standing beside you. Sunday arrived slowly, as if even time needed a moment to recover from the weight of the day before. The morning sun filtered through, the blinds in golden slices, painting soft shadows on my living room floor. I sat at the edge of the couch, barefoot, cradling a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. It felt like everything inside me had slowed to a crawl, not from defeat, but from an unfamiliar sense of stillness. For the first time in weeks, my hands weren't shaking. The phone beside me buzzed once, then fell silent. I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. I already knew what kind of messages were waiting. Sympathy disguised as curiosity, confusion masquerading as concern. And from Camille, likely silence, or a text that would once again beg forgiveness without ever truly offering change. I had learned the difference. The day passed quietly. No more secrets being whispered in kitchens. No cruel laughter echoing behind walls. Just me and the breath I'd been holding since the moment I stepped into her engagement party. Now, I finally let it out. Around noon, I opened my laptop and found myself staring at the folder I'd labeled Truth days ago. Screenshots, photos, recordings, every breadcrumb I'd gathered while stumbling through my grief and disbelief. It wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about clarity. When the people you love rewrite your story to make themselves more comfortable, sometimes the only thing you can do is keep a record of the real version. I had already posted once, those 3 images and a caption that spoke more to my heart than any confrontation ever could. But something still felt unfinished. It wasn't just about the cake or the storm or being erased. It was about a lifetime of being told I was too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. It was about how often I'd swallowed silence in the name of peace, not realizing it was costing me a part of myself every time I did. I drafted a new post, not to expose anyone, not to ignite another wave of family gossip, but to reach the version of myself who still lived inside other people. The ones who'd been told their truth was inconvenient, who'd been called the black sheep, the problem, the one who takes things too personally. I wrote it slowly, with care and intention. I wasn't just recounting events. I was reclaiming my narrative. By late afternoon, it was done. Just a few paragraphs. Measured, clear, honest. I ended it with a line that had been forming in my mind since the night I walked out of Camille's engagement party. Sometimes the ones who love the loudest are the ones who are left in silence, But silence is not absence. And this time, I chose not to disappear. I didn't post it right away. I let it sit, like bread rising in a warm kitchen, knowing some things are better when given time. I needed to make sure I wasn't writing from anger, but from truth. That I wasn't reaching for validation, but for connection. There is a difference, and healing lives in that space between. At dusk, I pulled on a coat and walked 2 blocks to the small bakery on Franklin Avenue. The one with the red door and the hand-painted sign that had always reminded me of someplace safer, warmer. The owner, Marie, recognized me and smiled, her eyes kind and knowing. "Another cake?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, voice soft. "Something simple, no inscription this time, just something sweet." She nodded without asking questions, just the way I needed her to. While she boxed it up, I stared out the window at the street. The snow had melted in patches, leaving slushy puddles reflecting the dim light of the setting sun. Everything looked ordinary again, but I knew better. I was different now, not louder, not harder, but clearer. Like the water after a storm when I returned home. I placed the cake on my kitchen counter and lit a single candle. No celebration, no names, just acknowledgement. For me, for the girl who had always shown up, even when she wasn't wanted. For the woman who finally realized that being excluded wasn't a reflection of her worth, but a symptom of their inability to love her as she was. I sliced the cake with care, took the smallest piece, and sat by the window. With each bite, I felt the remnants of that night fall away like dust. There had been pain. There had been betrayal. But there had also been awakening. And that was worth honoring. I eventually posted my message that night, but I didn't wait for likes or comments. I didn't scroll. I didn't check my notifications every few minutes the way I once might have. Because this wasn't about how people reacted. It was about how I felt afterward. Free later, just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. A single message from Daniel, Camille's fiancé or ex. I wasn't sure anymore. It read simply, "I saw your post. I'm sorry. For what I didn't say when it mattered." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned off my phone and placed it face down. Some apologies don't need replies. They just need to be heard. That night, I fell asleep with the window cracked open, the breeze cool against my skin. I didn't dream of cake or snowstorms or echoing voices in candlelit ballrooms. I dreamed of still water, of silence that felt safe, of the kind of peace that comes when you stop waiting to be invited and start building your own table instead. This wasn't the ending of our story, but it was the beginning of mine. And if this part of the journey speaks to you, if you've ever felt like your voice was too quiet to matter, let this remind you. Your truth deserves to be told. Your presence deserves a place. And your peace deserves protection. I didn't expect silence to feel this full. After everything, I thought I'd feel hollow, exhausted, maybe even vindictive. But sitting in the quiet of my apartment, wrapped in a worn but warm blanket, I felt something entirely different. Clarity. The night after brunch at Aunt Ray's house wasn't loud. No one yelled. No dishes crashed. But truth had weight, and when I dropped it in the middle of that cream-colored dining room, it cracked something open. I didn't stay for the fallout. I didn't wait for apologies that had years to arrive and never did. I left. Not in rage, not in pain, just with my head high and my phone in my pocket, holding proof of what everyone else had tried so hard to deny. When I stepped outside, the wind caught in my hair, and for the first time in what felt like years, it didn't feel like it was pushing me down. It felt like it was urging me forward. Back home, I made tea. Not because I needed comfort, but because I could. I didn't cry, not this time. I sat on the edge of my couch and scrolled through my phone. Not to reread texts, but to delete them. Messages from people who only ever reached out when I caused ripples in their carefully curated ponds. I removed myself from the family group chat. I muted Vina's Instagram. I archived every post where I pretended to be okay. It wasn't a purge. It was a quiet clearing. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't drama. It was growth. A message from Vina's fiancé, or maybe ex-fiancé. It was short. I heard everything. I should have said something. I'm sorry. No spin, no excuse, just accountability. It didn't fix years of fractures, but it reminded me that someone had been listening. That mattered. Then came a text from Blythe. I'm not proud of who I was that night. No punctuation, no performative sorrow. Just honesty. Late, but real. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed to forgive her, but because I needed to remember that sometimes people surprise you, just not always when you want them to. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight through the blinds. Not the soft, golden movie kind, the sharp kind that tells you a new day has arrived whether you're ready or not. I didn't rush to check my phone. I brewed coffee slowly. I opened the windows even though it was cold. I let the air in. I walked 2 blocks to the small bakery near my apartment. The same one where I'd ordered the cake I drove 12 hours through snow to deliver to a party where I wasn't wanted. I stood in front of the display case and picked out something simple. White frosting, gold-dusted edges, no writing. I carried it home in both hands, careful like it was something sacred. And maybe it was. Not the cake, but the act of buying it. For myself, with no occasion, no audience, just peace. At home, I lit a single candle and sliced the first piece. I didn't toast. I didn't take a picture. I just sat by the window and ate it slowly, watching the snow melt off the roof across the street. In that moment, I realized I was no longer trying to be seen. I was simply being. Vina hadn't messaged again. Neither had my mother. Maybe they were waiting for me to reach back. Maybe they were rewriting the story again. I didn't care. I wasn't a footnote in someone else's narrative anymore. I was the author of mine. I thought back to the hallway I had overheard them in. Their laughter, the cruelty so effortless it could have been rehearsed. I used to think I was the problem, that if I just smiled more, stayed smaller, said less, I'd finally be enough. But I know now that I was never the issue. I was just too real for a room built on image. I opened my laptop that night and posted a message. Not loud, not bitter, just true. Sometimes you show up for people who wouldn't cross a room for you, and that hurts. But it teaches you. It teaches you how to stop asking, how to stop shrinking, how to stop trying to be less just, to be loved more, and below it, one line. You are not too much. You are just enough for the right people. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't name names. But I saw who liked it, who messaged, who silently read and understood. People I didn't even know had been watching. That's the thing about truth. It travels on its own. The world didn't change overnight. Vina's wedding plans may still go forward, or they may quietly fall apart. Maybe she'll grow. Maybe she won't. That's not my story to tell anymore. What is my story is this. I drove through a blizzard for someone who wouldn't have opened the door for me, and I survived. I made it out not just safe, but stronger. Not just seen, but self-assured. I walked into a storm hoping for love and left with something better, clarity. And now, to anyone who's ever been made to feel like the outsider in their own family, let me tell you this. Your worth isn't measured by how well you stay silent. It's measured by how bravely you speak your truth. By how fully you show up for yourself when no one else will. If this story spoke to something inside you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unwanted, know this: you are not alone. And your story deserves space, too. Stick around. There are more stories to tell, more voices that need to be heard. If you believe in truth that heals, stories that fight back, and endings that feel like beginnings, subscribe to this channel. Support gives us the courage to keep going, and every voice that joins us makes the next story even stronger. Because sometimes the storm doesn't come to destroy. It comes to clear the air. And on the other side of it, there's you. Whole, powerful, and finally free.